Welcome to a new series, Footprints of History. This series is brought to you by the Drawing Board, with whom I'm partnering for third consecutive year. The Drawing Board is an international architecture competition based in India where students can test their skills in shaping the way communities live and thrive while preserving the local heritage. The Drawing Board has been running architecture competition for undergraduate students since 2016. It is conceptualized by Mindspace architects and Rohan builders. This year, which is the ninth edition of this competition, the design brief revolves around redesigning the Pathu Thoon Lane in Madurai, Tamil Nadu, India, also known as the 10 Pillar Street. The site is somewhere between the Madurai temple and the Thirumalai Nayakar palace. The design challenge: restore and integrate the lane's cultural heritage, emphasizing these 10 pillars. Submission deadline is 7th October 2024. More details in the show notes and the drawingboard.in. So let's begin our today's episode called Pillars of Past and the Present. I'm pleased to have Uday Andhare with us on AudioGAN. Uday is a design principal at Indigo Architects since 1998. He holds a degree from CEPT University and University of New Mexico. Uday advocates for technically appropriate and ecologically sensitive architecture, blending traditional wisdom with modern design. Uday teaches at CEPT University while leading his firm in Ahmedabad. He has drawn diverse experience while interning with BV Doshi and while working in the USA. So welcome Uday to AudioGAN. It's a real honor to have you on the show. And thanks for giving your time.
I'm looking forward to this.
I wanted to start off with when I'm assuming people who are watching this episode or listening to this episode must have done a bit of understanding or research around the 10 pillars. But so I wanted to start off by asking, what do you see when you see those 10 pillars of Pathu Thoon Lane? Which aspects stand out most for you from a intent or a material or even context point of view?
The temple town of Madurai holds a special place for all of us since the time we were students of architecture, studying cities. It was one of the most talked about southern Indian temple towns, almost compared in its antiquity with Ujjain and references of the past with Ujjain or Varanasi. So it kind of positions itself there in terms of my sort of connect with the city. Though I have never been there, I have studied and looked at its various facets. When the competition was launched and I first saw the dossier and the information in it, I thought that it was a very surreal moment when one discovers the 10 pillars, almost embedded in the city fabric, like inert objects, almost awaiting a newly imagined engagement. I was impressed by the scale, the kind of weight it carries, and the materiality. And it immediately talked of its resilience over time. And also, in a way, an imagined sense of place. I mean, you look at the street and the proximity with the built fabric now, but what it may have imagined been at that point of time. And a lot of historians have made references to its larger role, town plan of the city. Here, metaphorically, I view the street and the positioning of the 10 pillars as a threshold in metaphorical terms. And I leave it open because it's a threshold to something. It might have been a threshold to the temple precinct, the palace precinct, or to something else. And I kind of leave it at that for the moment.
Is it because of, I mean, even I don't know whether it's equidistant, but it's somewhere in the center of both the iconic places. Hence, you're calling it like a threshold, or you imagine something.
Distances itself from the palace precinct, almost suggesting that the palace grounds or the foreground to the palace must have been a very immense space. And one almost imagines that relationship in the larger context of things. So I don't know whether it was an entry point or an exit point or whether it was something in between. But right now it definitely positions itself right in the middle of this really thick urban ensemble and almost locked in. It's a threshold then to how one sees the programmatic aspects of the competition and how you engage with the spaces around it.
Hmm. And I'm assuming that the material lends itself to the main palace, or
I think I was looking at the manner in which the blocks interlock and sit on top of each other. There's a certain manner of making, a certain scale, a certain mass. And I was also going through Sanjay Moye's introductory video where he actually likens it to what he had seen at the Temple of Luxor in terms of its scale and its monumentality. So it leaves a lot of open-ended questions, but there is also a real positioning of what and how one would intervene. So that's my sort of broad take on the intent, materiality, and the context.
So I was listening to one. This is not connected, but I stumbled upon a podcast on BV Doshi where he was. I think the podcast name was the Getty podcast. I'll put the link in the show notes. So BV Doshi said in that interview, "Is architecture defined by theory or its convention, or is it something which is rooted in the place?" So given that backdrop, and your close association with Doshi sir, what are the potentialities of this kind of a project also? I mean, how do you look at it? Is it a restoration project? Is it a conservation project? Or you just let the pillars be and do something else with it? Where are you on that?
Yeah, so I think the character of the ancient Indian city per se is shaped by several layers. I think the geophysical character in this case, with overlays of religious, ritualistic orders, pervade the socio-economic landscape, and the flows of economies over time, trade, and so many things are kind of, it's a palimpsest in a way, and it's layered. And so one begins to see all these layers. And what probably Professor Doshi meant was how all these layers become inseparable and embed the city where it is, embed the people, connect the people through memories, through their daily rituals and orders that they follow. And so the rootedness actually comes through this oft repeated, antiquated processes, layer after layer, and generation after generation, that anchors people through memory and place in cities of this nature. I mean, and so to me, that is really what rootedness would be, I think, in a sense. Whether you have lived there or not, the experience of going through the city immediately grows on you, and you begin to see those layers act in this kind of an arena, which is exciting. So that's what I think. So these flows and layers of habitation, I think, are important in defining the character of such places over time. But every entity, in a way, has one of these facets, that make a city. So we can say that rootedness is implicit in a way.
Hmm.
But the project opens up few ways to view the 10 pillars. One is a set of elements in the larger spatial organization of the town, defining relationships between the temple and an extension of the imagined ambit of the palace. And then these structures are like a visual reference in space somewhere. In another sense, more locally, the impact of those oversized totems sitting in this tight street make new points of reference and engagement with the pillars, and maybe as landmarks with spatial possibilities connected with the imagined program. So this is a little. So there are these two things which I was grappling with. One is, what does it mean at the scale of the city, and how does one situate this project in the context of the city? And then there is the local intervention from where certain things could emanate. Make references to something else. So these are all possible imaginations of how one could intervene and how one could shape a program that can facilitate something like this.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that if there was something between, it got changed, there were different layers of generations changing the place overall, but somehow these 10 stood or stood the test of time. So I'm sure there's more to it, and
But I would like to think that this calls for a sensitive. Your question was also about whether you consider it a restorative project or conservation or what. So I think it calls for a sensitive but bold reimagination of the street, the broader neighborhood, in that sense, with an approach that's technically sound and something that embeds ideas of stakeholder participation, new partnerships within that space, something that ensures resilience, flexibility, and possibilities of evolution into new purposes and functions over time. It's not like this one time act of building which you do and it's all over, but one learns from the city as to how resilience gets integrated. The idea of resilience is also about longevity and the ability of the built habitat to adapt to new challenges over time. So I think totems that stand in the street are testimony to that. Their simplicity, the making, the mass of the structures, and what they actually, could become.
Does it kind of point to not even building anything but just making some changes which will empower people and then grow organically, which will again stand test of time? Is it hinting towards that, or?
It depends on what one does with the clearing. The removal of certain things is very strategic, because the moment you remove the shade, I saw that drawing in which certain parts could be removed and you could build 50% on the ground, and an FSI is dictating the whole thing. There's a height restriction, so there is a certain spatial configuration that is sort of imminent. But that clearing means to the people in that neighborhood and the city at large is the programmatic question. What brings in people? What do people do? How does it become public? What is the character of that public space? What are the functions that will ensure a certain inclusivity and also something which will endure over time? One of the examples that came to my mind when I was going through the brief and other things was this very interesting study done of Maheshwar. And Maheshwar is this place on the banks of the Narmada. There's a Holkar Wada which was established by the Holkar family, and then over time there was this tradition of weaving in that area, and then there was a little sort of an extension to the Holkar Wada on the edge of the river, which became like these weaving shawls where the local weavers would come and work. And then this institution actually spurred a fantastic change within the built fabric of the city. The artisans learned the craft over time. Some knew it. There was an exchange. And then there were these weavers having their weaving shawls within their homes. And then this whole town actually develops as a center for excellence. And so you look at the impetus given by an institution, a patron, a society which is able to take that up and lead it somewhere. And most of our traditional towns, which have crafts, have received this kind of patronage and grown into some beautiful environment. And southern India has lots of such examples. These are the things that kind of become important entities within the urban fabric, which activate, enliven, bring people together. There's commerce, there is movement and inflows. So it's not different from the commerce we are seeing right now, except but it kind of creates a different spatial, has the potential to create a different spatial organization that will sort of do something interesting.
Wow, I'm kind of impressed with the vocabulary itself. It creates a spatial space for things to grow on their own eventually and enduring. So Uday, in your practice also at Indigo and the projects that Indigo Architects have been, there's a conscious choice of using friendlier materials, right? We consider some intervention to restore this place or even just build things around it, right? Would you engage in, say, like new materials, new technology of the current time, or stick to something which is local or of the same fabric? How would you kind of use the material aspect in this?
So I think the answers to all of this which you're asking usually is embedded in the site and its immediate context and the broader context from where one sources materials or one steps out into the landscape and discovers certain vernacular practices of using a certain material in a certain way. So I think that discovery happens through a certain search. And usually, oft repeated materials that one sees, which are frugal, which come from local spaces or places, are the ones that would naturally be the go to materials because there is abundance of supply. They have a smaller ecological footprint in that sense. Transportation is low. And so many considerations go into, actually deciding what one would use as an appropriate material and an appropriate technology that goes alongside it. Here, I think individually, I think one needs to search around into the making of the town. What do you see as a predominant material? Is that available right now? Has it undergone a process of change? When did the materiality change? So the city will tell you a lot of things because of the changes that happen in the geophysical environment around the city. So I think that's something which is important. But site-specific interventions need new strategies. So you may have the same material and you may have stone available there, but the site is so it's so difficult to transport that stone in, unload it, take it. So you will have to take a call about what exactly will your tectonic choices be, how they will dictate the making of what you are proposing. But I think resilience and ability to withstand certain things is important. To me, I think robustness of detailing is a very important aspect. I think it has to be robust.
No, so I'm digressing a bit, but when I look at the couple of artifacts that Rohan Builders and Mindspace Architects have given with the video of Sanjay sir, it seems everywhere there's just concrete, right? So one has to actually go and search for the sake of it, because at a first glance you will see concrete everywhere. It's almost like a proper village or town, whatever we call it. I mean, if people haven't used those materials which were there before but introduce new materials in today's time, why not just continue with that and blend it? Or this has to have its own flavor, that's why we want to use something more local.
That's a very open choice in that sense. If concrete is the choice that somebody makes to build, then the next question is, what about concrete do you think you should use? In which way should you use it? There's reinforced cement concrete and there's lime concrete, and there are so many different kinds of things which have stood the test of time. Would you do something which is prefabricated and assembled because you are in a very tight space? So one has to figure out these things and have a rationale for what would really be appropriate for that particular task on hand. And that also goes back to program, the kind of sort of architecture one is envisioning. And it's also something where one imagines a project that is not a one time act of building, but something where the community comes in over time periodically and adds to. And there are those kind of, so it all depends on the conceptual take of individual projects, I think.
I'm not from a architecture background, but I've heard a lot of interviews, and when I see Doshi sir's interview or Laurie Baker's some bits here and there, and when they keep saying it should grow on its own, I'm totally fascinated. Sometime I would like to deep dive and understand what it means also. But yeah,
Yeah, so it's not so tightly wound up and finished as a product, but something which remains like a work in progress. Certain things can add on to it, and the additions that happen to say old homes as the family grows or changes and things like that talk about this accretive process. And cities are all about that. And Madurai, its densities has been achieved over a period of time with this accretions one over the other, finding space and then making things work. There is that also which needs to be respected in certain ways, I feel. And there are numerous examples that do that beautifully.
so just going a bit more meta on this, what are the few anchor points of traditional Indian architecture that holds relevance till today?
I think one looks at vernacular traditions of construction that embody the human potential to work alongside nature. That to me is a very important aspect because one can produce structures of value that remain resilient and humane in a way and meaningful as a result. So I think the moorings of we actually see as formal structures in architecture actually comes from there. And then there is a sort of a formalization of processes and materials, and there are guilds that add more value and craft and ornament and so many things. But in essential, the essential aspects are actually practices that have come from more vernacular, unstructured traditions. But this is a vital learning, I think, for all of us, because embodied traditions defined by guilds in the making of formal structures express a heightened understanding of science and engineering. I think, to me, just to contextualize this with the Pathu Thoon Street and the columns, these structures, and just looking at it closely, understanding how they sit there, what is the base, what is the shaft, and what are the interlocking details in the shaft, as you see. And then at the top, how does the scale get broken? Was that done earlier, or was it always part of the initial idea? So many things come about, but the finish and the proportions, all of those come from a very resolved understanding of engineering. So those are some of the takeaways I think that all of us have in the context of this project or the competition.
What would be the enduring aspect? You spoke about a good grasp of science and technology, which is, so if you're closer to nature, you learn that very naturally as opposed to like an academic standpoint. So any thoughts on what are the few enduring aspects of architecture that you observed in in this structure, or in general also, like what can be borrowed from other places similar to these? Or
So I think one needs to, I mean, at least I look at try to figure out what are the operative principles at work, whether it is related to, say, material. If you're looking at stone, or construction in stone, or construction in wattle and daub, or using lime as a primary material to bind things, or timber. Then each of these processes have a very defined discipline of what one does in what context and how. So those learnings sort of inform our methods and material choices even today, ought to. So if you're deciding to work with a certain material, then what are the compatible choices that material allows you to make? And in more in today's times, you're looking at, okay, if you're working with steel, so what does steel lend itself to? What does stone lend itself to? And what does timber lend itself to? And where are the commonalities? Where are the if two materials come together, what is that third material which has the capability to mediate and resolve a detail for you? So in all of these, even historic, like oft repeated details that you find using stone, use dowels in a certain way to anchor two stone slabs together. Now they could be poured lead, or it could be an iron anchor, or it could be timber. There are various ways things are done in different conditions. So this the possibilities of what works with what is are immense, but one needs to be able to make the right choices. And so I think in this exercise is embedded this whole idea of expression, that what emerges as architectural expression comes from a thoughtful set of choices that one makes, and they are truthful in a sense that they respect the materiality, they respect the tolerances of each material and the capability of each material, and understand that limit. It obviously lends itself to something meaningful and hence beautiful, rather than forced or image driven.
yeah, your comment on that actually reminds me. I forgot the name of the author, but when you're designing a chair, think of chair in a room in a city in a environment. So it all is layered and cascading to the larger context of what is being built.
But I was also, talking about. You said what are the other enduring aspects, and I look at, in the built habitat, you find courtyards, you have transition spaces, some semi-open spaces, and spaces that are defined by nature, like a space under a large tree. And these need to be brought back into our imagination, I think, rather than isolated buildings that are sealed and shut. So my point is about porosity. I think the city is about, at the ground level, everything is very porous. You can meander, you can see through, and so many things happen which are interconnected and welcoming. Unfortunately, the way buildings are being imagined today are sealed containers with conditioned spaces, and so there is hardly any room for them to breathe in literal terms, and also be less welcoming. So it's only a door through which one enters a building. You cannot meander through a building without entering the door or a set of buildings. So the point is that these cities afford a certain, or teach us about what porosity means, and whether we can begin to understand that in its true sense.
I think one has to be trained to see through also, because as a layman, I can just see whatever is open is just the sky right now. Otherwise, everything looks interlocked and tightly fitted with those pillars.
You are walking through these gullies and streets in an old town, and you see these streets that widen and narrow and go up and down, and at certain vantage points you are able to see through into the others in somebody else's house, and you can see through their courtyard into another street, or you see a temple inside, or you see something. And whether you look at Ujjain, Varanasi, even Madurai, there is this constant this sense of discovery as you walk, and I think that's a fantastic quality which has emerged because of the organic, creative ways of organizing one's day-to-day lives and habit and build spaces. But that is something which I think is very vital. Programs that are public oriented to actually succeed.
And is this because of the specific to Indian culture where things are much open, much social, or
Largely, but we are not the only uh, civilization which looked at it or looked at built habitat in this way. But I think Central Asia, the tropics in a certain way, I think have a certain character which lends itself to this kind of an experience.
now that, yeah, it makes sense. It will be connected to nature with lot of heat or lot of different kind of a climate.
And all of this is actually a system which is created as a defense against the elements. So narrow streets, deep spaces, so the sun hardly reaches the ground maybe around noon and then it's gone. So a place like Madurai, for example, with its density and the heat that it already has all of these streets which must function quite well in the summer. I think shade is a very important aspect in our culture.
I think it's a nice segue to your philosophy, which I was going through the website. It said that you search for like contemporary rootedness in this ever-changing environment. So first of all, if you could unpack this for us, and also how do you spot this? Like what are the key parameters in which this search can happen? How do you find that rootedness, or even the, yeah, I mean, because it's changing, right?
Let me define what I mean by search. I mean, the search is basically to develop a keen eye to observe things all the time. So you observe people, you observe place, you are deeply entrenched in understanding food and understanding people's culture through their food and how they grow their how their agriculture and all of those things. So the search is to know more about the other, understand people better. And for architects, I think that is a very important aspect of our learning in the initial years. The exposure you get to various kinds of environments, to understand the why of things and the how of things. How was it done? Why was it done? So, since our days in school as architecture students, there's this constant impetus to pick up things and store them as memory. And I kind of liken this to having this jhola or a bag. And every time you see something, you capture it and think about it, or you write or you sketch about it, and it's captured in your imagination. And that is a very important tool to resolve things when you are working on something or trying to solve a situation or try to understand a situation. And your recall actually helps you to go back to those experiences. So the search is actually for the new experience each time, to find something new and to find something which you have not seen before or known of. So there's this. So you are like a sponge. You want to absorb all this and hold on to it, and then recall it when you need it. And that's kind of a. It becomes second nature to most of us. I think that it is very important to do that. So that search is the act of collecting, assimilating, and then recalling it when needed, confront a situation that it would be useful for. That's that. And rootedness is something which kind of over time you tend to sort of find meaning in what one does. So the smallest of tasks, search is endless, but it's like a collation of experiences stored. Search is driven by a mad curiosity to begin with, but it's a people centric and a nature centric search. So you observe what happens in nature, you have observe people and places. the recall of these experiences immediate. When you need it, it reinforces the process of design, and it helps you keep certain things grounded, your thoughts grounded, because your thoughts have to be embedded in something to be able to take flight. And it cannot just be flighty. It has to be grounded in something meaningful, and that's the thing that is important. But rootedness maybe comes from something which is a deeper understanding of the context and the rules that it has defined for you. You may not be from a particular cultural background, but if the understanding of the site, its people, the context, and all of those things, if one assimilates it, then you begin to understand the rules of the game as being what is appropriate. And then I think that rootedness comes from. So it's not that we are familiar with every site that we build on. We have to familiarize ourselves and become one with it and understand it. And then the dialogue begins about what is permissible in that sense. So that's what I meant by this whole, search and rootedness, how the two things are important.
Beautiful, beautiful. Is it safe to say, because I was connecting the dot, and in Vedanta there's a concept called Niti, right? So in search, while you're searching, you are actually questioning each and every thing that you encounter, and you say this is not the real truth. Maybe there's something more, and that search continues till you reach the roots. And the process in Vedanta is called Niti. But I think I'm trying to connect these two dots. Yeah, yeah.
It's about that you keep searching and you keep deliberating on the thoughts till you begin to have a sense of rightness about something. Gut feeling is, which says, okay, I think this is where this can hold itself. The idea can hold itself.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, wonderful you brought that up.
And now I get it, but I would like to ask this question. So in this search of continuous inquiry of what the place holds for, or what this particular situation tells me, right? Like in that context, and for you, every project, for Indigo Architects, every project generally starts as if it's a first one. So how can a practicing architect or any creative individual like maintain or build this freshness, or build this worldview or this outlook to start everything from fresh? Because there will be biases always, and as you said, you have collected that memory, so continuously being porous is a tough one. So any tips or thoughts, especially for students?
Yeah, so in continuation of the last answer, concern for attempting something meaningful and this grounding that one searches for drives a certain naivety. So one feels that, in that you really don't sort of feel a priori experience will lead you and give you this whole lot of confidence to straight away jump into it and say, I know what to do. Consciously being away from that, saying, wait a minute, don't know how to do this one. Let me figure this out. So every time you do a school or every time you build somebody's home, a home is a home, but the site is different. The individual is different. Your interaction with them is different. You don't know how it's going to take off. And there is this very, very sort of measured approach into the process as though it was never done before. It's like something you are figuring out each time. It's only after the initial few steps where you kind of see the clearing and you see that this is heading somewhere interestingly. That's when the thing sort of gets traction. But I think this naivety is a very positive thing in a way. It's not. I'm not saying naive in the sense of the word naive thing. It's about making yourself vulnerable and opening up to the newness of something. Even though you have built a house for somebody in the past, maybe 20 of them, but still the newness of that experience is something to be cherished. That is something which is there's a bit of anxiety, but there's also this joy, discovering or trying to understand things in a certain way. Like you end up meeting some very interesting people for whom you and their choices and whether they align with you or don't align with you. There are all kinds of things, and there's this common ground which is reached where things eventually begin to take shape. But that initial phase of understanding yourself at that point in time, what was the last project you had done, what was it like, all those things really don't matter. This is almost like You are as good as what you are on that day. The rest of the work that you've done doesn't matter. So that's what I meant by that newness all the time.
I remember two quotes. In fact, because you said you start almost afresh, I recently read one quote that said, "When in doubt, follow a process." In design, when in doubt, follow a process. So, in if you stick to those fundamental process, you obviously start with a blank slate, right? Because you don't know anything. And I remember one Guruji Ravindra Sharma, and he said, "हम जब निकलते थे तो कुछ देखने के लिए नहीं निकलते थे, कुछ भी देखने के लिए निकलते थे." So just wander and then explore as if you're like completely blank slate, and then absorb and then figure out. So but there is a little bit reactive nature to this, and is that fine in this? Because generally it's said, right, like you have to be proactive. So being a bit porous, is it a trade-off of
One takes things cautiously. One is absorbing the newness of things. Say, for example, you go and see a new site, and it's very easy to quickly conclude what can happen there because of a priori experience. You know the parameters, you know climate, you know what is going to go happen there. So it's very it's tempting to get into that slot and say, you know what, this is what it can be, and to get into the slowness of things to say, okay, there's certain observations you've made, but you've still not understood the place. While you have understood it, but you don't want to acknowledge that you've understood it, because then the next step would be to sort of almost conclude that these are the two or three things that can emerge from this. So the idea is to kind of slow down that process, dwell on it. And I think that the phase of dwelling on a new idea or a new endeavor and taking your time to take off the blocks is a very important one. So, you know, it also has to do with your swabhav. There are people who will roll up their sleeves and say, you know, of course I can do it, and it's already on the way to getting done. And then there are others who would, you know, say, let me figure this out. And it's that space in which you're figuring it out, understanding what it entails, is probably a very important one. It's difficult, it's sometimes joyful, it's also something you don't want to miss. So that's,
it can be painful, but still I think one has to see through it. I mean, that's where the pause, that's where the slowness.
yeah, pain is integral to everything.
Correct, yeah. I think Niti can be a good hack here, where you always say that, yeah, just this is not it. Like, hang on, sir. It's been amazing. I have a lot of more questions, but just in the context of this particular project, I have one last question. Which faculty would you recommend, or which faculty would you suggest young architects to build to go slow, or especially with the future digital world, right? With AI, like I just pretty much told Midjourney to figure out what these 10 pillars can do, and it can simulate whatever imaginary stuff. Now there are these things on mobile phones as well. So what should faculty one has to build in to accept or reject these AI proposals, right? I mean, this is a very fundamental and burning question at the moment, where AI is taking over, and perhaps there is something which AI is gathering on its own related to climate change, but finally we have that consciousness. So, what is your take on that?
So I was just thinking, you know, that culturally we are not trained to ask questions as a society. Asking questions is considered to be rude or over smart. Hopefully that's changing, but if you look at it in the larger context of things, asking questions is not doesn't come naturally. If you have a question, you will keep it inside and you will somehow figure it out later, but you will never ask and dwell on it or discuss. So, in the context of AI and other things, this is where we are coming from culturally. And now it's all about asking questions, right? AI is about asking the right questions. And are we equipped to ask those questions? Is the question that I raise. And how do we equip ourselves to ask the right questions? I think to begin with, thinking and working with one's hands ought not to be outsourced to a third party tool or an entity entirely. So I think we what has happened, and there's this whole discussion in design studies and in architecture, that how much are you relying on your abilities to uh, think through using your hand. So there is a design thinking relationship with the hand and all of that. And somehow it's kind of become like endoscopic surgery where you actually don't touch the patient, but it's happening through other devices. How much of that should you hold on to, and how much of that should be outsourced? But thinking cannot be outsourced. Doing can be outsourced, but how much of it do you do yourself with your hand so that the tactility of the process is sort of part of your thinking? How much of it really is then sourced out to automation and other kinds of tools for production of certain kinds of things which are humanly time consuming or tedious. But I think the role of the mind and hand and pencil to paper is something which is undeniably important.
But they give a structure, right? Like, I mean, whatever I have used, at least, they give you a starting point, they give you some structure, some framework. Maybe because of my application, is that possible in architecture where
AI is used widely in various spheres. So if I talk about architectural generation of ideas, or bouncing off ideas, it's very immediate and it's very conclusive whatever comes to you. So when so the idea, what I feel is that we need to develop our skills to become more discerning, more critical of what is sent to us. And do we have that ability to be critical of something which is generated so quickly within seconds? Based on that, one sort of defines the quality and consistency and the depth of questions one raises, because that defines the outcome. Is again, that is again something where the onus is still on us to be able to ask the right questions and curate the outcome and its possibilities. So which is what the design process actually is. We accept that now the speed with which something happens is very quick. The imaginary things, and yes, it can be used as a parallel tool where you are trying to take it in a certain direction, and there are visual cues that it gives you to what it can become, and you should be careful there whether that is exactly where you want to go or not. And how do you decide that? It's something which is very exciting, and something which holds a lot of potential, but strengthening one's own processes first about how one would, because it's not a structured process, like it's not a process that is structured in a way that fits only one way of thinking. It all depends on how you engage, and I think your terms of engagement with AI are going to be very important. And for that, there needs to be a priori riyas about you think you are in the absence of all of these tools. It's exciting, it's fun. And I think, anything that's generative, the only, in all of this, I feel that how do we learn to recognize the value of deeper structure as a process of inquiry versus an image driven, outcome oriented approach? So the first part is, the onus is on us, and the outcomes will emerge. But how we sift through it is very important.
so true? Because yesterday I was facing some challenge and I said, like, I really need to prepare a good prompt. So the prompt is more important for the AI, that how well structured I am in what outcome I want or what output of what I would like to, and then keep refining it. But obviously my application is very different, and here that process of understanding the site itself or understanding wish to do with this site is much more critical thinking. And then maybe starting point can be AI prompts, but I think eventually good designer has to be a good curator also, so you have to reject and yeah.
And I think that the discerning eye will begin to understand what to leave behind or where things are going astray. It's very interesting because in student works and studios, one observes that there are like 40 options that it emerges with. Then what do you do with that? Do you have a process in place which says, okay, this is what I think it should, this is valuable and this is not? So how do you identify and recognize things of value in that process that you again bring back into your fold? You dwell on it and then again go back to a process which is interactive with an artificial medium. I think it's it's something that I think everybody will learn on their own, having their own grounded sort of depth of inquiry, and defining that is very important in the early years.
Cool. I think, yeah, this is a good note to end. I have a lot of questions and wish we can continue this chat. But thanks a lot, Uday. Give your time. It was an honor talking to you, and I look forward to have you again on the show.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you.
And that's it from today's GAN session. For show notes and more GAN, visit audiogan.com. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at AudioGAN Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.